All right. Good morning. This is Jason Thornton with the post sermon conversation. And with me today is Gigi Stewart. Gigi Stewart is not only a friend, but she happens to be a memorialite like me. And Gigi has been very much engaged in these post sermon conversations for weeks offline with both Tim and I, questions and observations and just feedback. And so Tim and I thought it would be a great idea to have that conversation online. And so in a second, I'll turn it to you. I do want to point out that I am seated in what used to be A2, so Memorial people will recognize this chair layout. I found this picture last night, and I thought I would include it today. It also hides the clutter of my space. So with no further ado, Gigi, welcome to Post-Sermon Conversations.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here because I wanted to be in this conversation. So this is kind of fun for me.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to jump right in because there was just so much in your sermon on Sunday. It was full of great stuff. So the first thing I want to jump into is this slavery mentality versus freedom mentality. And just that whole idea that the Israelites didn't even know what freedom was. And all they wanted was pain to stop. And that really resonated. Just this idea of we haven't been born into slavery, but we act like we have, and that we're trapped in that. So let's talk about that for a little bit. We are acting like we're born into slavery, like the Israelites, like we've never known freedom, but freedom is actually a choice for us.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And there is it's slavery on its own is awful and heartbreaking. But when freed people choose to function like they're slaves, that's a whole different kind of heartbreak. And then to not know that we have access to freedom. And it really is how we think is how we experience the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
There are people today at the height of their peace, which is mind blowing. But there are people walking on our earth that experience their best day. They feel so connected to God and filled with His Spirit. And there are other people that have the same access to freedom and it doesn't register. And this is not an American problem. When Paul wrote the book of Galatia, or Galatians to the Galatians, the whole book was about you have traded freedom in Christ. And basically, if you think about the two-chair model, you have put your full weight down on things that you cannot trust to give you the fruit of the Spirit, love and joy and peace. And so Terry tells a story of being on an airplane with an Iraqi, I can't remember if it was an American soldier coming from Iraq. No, I think it was like an Iraqi coming, or maybe I can't remember, but somebody that their country had just experienced some freedom. And in their flight, they start talking, and the man says, yes, we have freedom, but nobody knows what to do with it yet. And I remember hearing similar things when the wall fell and USSR ceased to exist, that I knew people in Russia, and they're like, we love the thought of it, but we don't know how. And I was raised unintentionally. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm simply saying I was raised to think you better do well or you're going to get punished. That's a slave mentality. And if the Bible said that, especially in the New Testament, we'd be like, well, that's what we have. It's just we've been given the opposite, and especially in, I think it's chapters 4, where he starts talking about, do you understand the slave of a son? And he's contrasting Ishmael and Isaac. The slave of a son has to live like this, but your son's of the promise. Your son's of freedom. And then when he gets in chapter 5, he said, it is for freedom that you've been freed. Don't give in to a yoke of slavery. And that's not throwing up, just off. I don't have to listen to anybody, because 13 verses later, he's like, when you have this freedom, don't indulge yourself. Give of your freedom to serve others, So it's not, I'm free to do what I want, because that ultimately leads back to destruction.
Right.
And this is that dynamic. But yeah, he's welcoming us into something that I'm just going to own. I am a practicing amateur concept.
I am with you. I mean, it's definitely, God can't make the choice for us. We have to step into that choice, and and step out of the traps that Satan is setting for us. Because he's setting lots of traps: judgment, blame, fear. And I want to move into that idea of fear that you were talking about, the fear of abandonment. And I just kind of went down a rabbit hole of thinking about that and thinking about the people in the Bible that acted from a place of fear of abandonment. If you think about Mary and Martha, Martha acted from a place of, he's not going to be there for me, he's only there for my sister. Or the story of the prodigal son and the older brother. I mean, he's acting from a place of, well, he loves my younger brother better and I'm not going to be included. Even David, who is a man after God's own heart, if you read some of the Psalms, they'll start out in, God, why have you abandoned me? Why have you forsaken me? And then leads right into praise for God.
Right. Yeah.
Even our Savior on the cross in Matthew and Mark talks about, I mean, he says at the end, my God, why have you forsaken me? And we know why he had to be separated in that moment. It was for our sin. But that fear of abandonment is definitely a thread through the entire Bible. This is nothing new to our generation.
Yeah.
It's been
That's
around since the beginning of time, since Adam and Eve had to leave the garden. I think that's the root of where that fear began, and it began out of sin.
That is, man, that is so insightful. I think here's the rub. I can say that to you on Sunday in a sermon, and then on Monday I can hear from somebody and feel abandoned all over again.
Right.
And talk about, one of the things that blows our mind when we look at whether it's the Israelites in the, leaving Egypt, or whether it's the apostles or whoever, we think to ourselves, didn't they just see that miracle? Like, wait a minute. Do you have any sense? Like, are you so locked into this moment you can't remember 5 minutes ago? Mm-hmm. And I can be really critical, and honestly was raised to be very critical of the dumb Israelites and the mean Pharisees. And the message of those stories is, I'm them. I'm them. As soon as I stop trusting fully in God, and that includes, he's got me 100%. But I will have the best Friday, and Saturday I can get a message in the email. I can get a call. I can have one interaction. I'm just like, well, I guess I'm washed up. But
exactly.
what I'm really saying is, God can't be trusted with me. God, I'm too much of a mess. God, I can't trust you with my mess. You love everybody else. You have purpose for everybody else, but I don't. And see, the key here is not to say, so eliminate the fear of abandonment. You will have the fear of abandonment. If all these people had it, you'll have it too. It's owning it and getting back in the chair of just putting your full weight on him, trusting him. It's not saying, how do I correct myself with these 10 verses? Or how many church services can I go to feel, or what good thing can I do today? All those things are good, but only if you're resting in Christ. If you're not resting in Christ, you're functionally worshiping an idol called you and your own perspectives. And so for me to own, Gigi, today I fear abandonment. Going into this very conversation, I'm not speaking in somebody else. I'm saying in me, I feel that fear in me. With working through the building process, I'm like, God, why won't you give us a crystal clear answer right now? Every time somebody says, how is the building process going at Memorial? I'm like, I'm sorry. I wish we could do better. And they're not even asking that. But it is that fear. Oh, God led us here, and now we better do good. That's fear of abandonment.
Right. And I love that you just said that about, God, why can't you give us a crystal clear? I mean, how many times have I been in prayer personally and said, God, I need a clear answer. I need an answer right now. And it stems from that fear of, you're not listening to me. You don't really want to take care of me. You really don't want to hold me in your hands today. And man, that is so Satan feeding us that. He fed Adam and Eve that. He's still feeding it to us, and we're still buying it. We're still eating that fruit.
That's right. Well, and what hit me a while ago studying the temptation of Jesus, with the 3 temptations.
Yes.
The temptation at play was not to create bread or jump off a temple, or even for the people to bow down. The temptation was, if you are the Son of God. Why is that a temptation? Because God had just told him at baptism, 40 days earlier, depending on when the temptations actually started, he said, you are my son. And the devil's first words to him is, if you are the Son of God,
Right.
don't trust God with your identity. Prove it by making bread.
Mm-hmm.
And see, we've made it. Look how good he memorized the scriptures. And yeah, he had the scriptures, and we need to as well. But his confidence, the temptation wasn't, did you memorize enough? Did you do your daily Bible reading? The temptation was, don't believe God until you can prove it to you and me. And that's what you're saying. The choice isn't, will I obey? That's not the primary choice. The choice is, will I believe? But man, if we're not believing, all the obedience in the world won't make any difference.
That is so good. It's about believing our identity in him and believing who we are in him. And it's really not about all these other things that Satan tricks us into doing, but it's the root of it is, are we really children of God? Am I really his daughter? Are you really his son of the King? And do we buy it? Do we really buy it?
Right. And if you say to yourself, well, mature Christians don't deal with this, I would say, so you're saying Jesus was an immature Christian? Because if the devil got to Jesus, now keep in mind, it was a temptation because Jesus was tempted. You can't call it a temptation if Jesus didn't feel tempted. And so if the devil can get to Jesus, he will get to me. He will get to everybody. And so it's not weakness to realize I'm fearing abandonment. It's so liberating to say, I'm not trusting God right now. And it's not to say you'll immediately move to trust, but then you're like that guy, I don't trust you, Jesus. Will you help me trust you? I believe, help me in my unbelief. He's saying, I don't believe you, but I want to. And Jesus like, I'll work with that. But denying it basically creates division between Jesus and me.
Exactly. And I mean, and if we think about Jesus as he walked on this earth, it wasn't like he just asked one time that this cup pass him. I mean, he was constantly in communion with his Father. He did not want to go to the cross. I mean, who would want that?
That is brilliant. You're absolutely right.
So,
you're absolutely right.
I mean, it's not like he hasn't felt what we have felt. He has. He has empathy for us because he's felt it. And I think we disconnect from that.
Yes.
We don't connect to, he walked on this earth. He did not want to die. He was in constant communion with his Father. You know, I don't want this, but I will do it. So, I mean, it's just, we've lost that connection in some areas, I think.
Right.
So,
I think it was Tim and Kim had us do a reading alongside our small groups last year. And for the life of me, I cannot draw the author's name to mind. But one of the quotes I so remember, or I at least attribute to him, was, the Pharisees could not see Jesus's divinity because they only saw his humanity. We struggle with the opposite. We only see Jesus' deity or divinity, and so we miss his humanity.
Exactly.
Despite the fact, as you said so well, it continues to be presented. For it to say in Hebrews, he was tempted in every way, that means he wanted that sin and chose not to.
Exactly.
You know, and we just assume he's above it. He doesn't care about it. You know, he has no problems.
We completely take his humanity out of the equation.
Right.
Every time. And it makes me, I mean, I'm going to kind of go off on a different tangent now, just talking about our identity. And it makes me wonder what God thinks of all that. You know, just if he's sitting up there going, seriously, guys, I've told you who you are. I mean, I think of Ephesians 1, and he talks about how we are chosen. We are adopted. We have an inheritance. We have been sealed in him with the promise of the Holy Spirit. I mean, that is language that says you are wanted, you are loved, your identity is in me.
Yeah. So true. Well, and I would say, were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I would say that dynamic of the letters is an indicator of not just of our identity, but of his understanding of how quickly we forget our identity and feel like
Yep.
we've got to create our own. I got to make the right decisions. I got to do the right things. I got to da da da. I need to know the answers for what's going to happen 5 and 10 and 20 years from now, despite the complete irrationality of that statement.
Exactly.
And that pressure we feel is a signal, trust God. But instead we think, I'm going to bear up under it and show how strong I am. And God's like, come to me, all who are weary and heavy, pressured, and I will give you rest. Then we'll do the work together. But we don't believe that. I want to say to this, how does God feel about us? Best illustration I've ever heard. And if it's wrong, we can talk that through. If your grandchild gets to an age and you decide that you are wanting your grandchild to know how to swing a wiffle ball bat, right? And so that your child can hold the bat, they can stand, sort of that age, I don't know, 2, 3 years old, and you get them up there and you stand them, you get behind them and you position the bat and everything. And then you move out a few feet and you pitch to them and it's perfect strike, slow and gentle lob, just right over the plate. And your kid does like chopping wood, way over here, the pitch way over here. So you'll probably go back and position the child and do practice swings. But if you pitch 5 times and they do like this, what you will naturally do is your pitch will move towards their swing. You will adjust your intention, even your perfection, to their weakness to let them know that you're with them. Now, you won't leave them there. You'll keep growing them. You don't want them to be an adult going like this, but they're a child, and your instincts of your grandmotherly instincts would naturally be your instinct as a human, but specifically that added dynamic. God says, Jesus says that you know how to give good gifts to your kids. If your kid asks for bread, you don't give them a stone.
Right.
How would you think that you, being evil, know how to do better than God? Even good gifts. I'm telling your Father, by comparison, I'm evil. My highest motivation's on my own. He's going to give the Holy Spirit, is what it says. And so that's his feeling towards us. It's our impatience that we can project on him. And maybe it's because the adults that raised us in Christianity were impatient with us a lot, and they would justify it by cleanliness is next to godliness. When you don't clean up your room, a verse not in the Bible. But yeah, it'd be you've got to be quiet when you're in the house of God. And then they use we would sing this to kids sometimes. The Lord is in his holy temple at all the earth. He's not talking about his church service, but it's been made. You as a child were taught, no, we don't meet you where you are. You need to measure up. And that's what church has taught a lot of us.
Exactly. That mentality of earning a relationship with him. Like we have to get to a certain point, use our own abilities to get to a point to where he will accept us and earn our spot in the relationship with him. And it's just, I loved that you brought up David and how when he was throwing the stones at Goliath, he was way more moral in that moment than he was on the day he died. And just looking at his entire life and seeing that he had some really bad things that he did in his life, and yet he was a man after God's own heart. And that just speaks volumes of we can't earn our spot in the relationship with him. I mean, the relationship is there. We just have to be willing to step into it.
That's right. And it's a constant, it's like your marriage, you loved Brett more than any other human being the day you married him, or else, unless there are some details I don't know. So, because I wasn't there, to be fair. But that's why we marry somebody. We're like, I love this person more than any other human on the face of the earth. But you don't just do that. Let's relate it to, that's the baptism, if you will, into that relationship. That's the commitment. I'm in, I receive the benefits of that right there. And then, but to think that that's enough, and we don't keep growing and we don't keep forgiving and we don't keep learning. The vows that we say, the essence of our vows is, I'm willing to die to myself for you,
Mm-hmm.
my spouse. Okay. And the only reason marriages continue healthy is if you continue with that mentality, the vow mentality of I'm going to die to myself for you. It has to continue every day. Now, the reason you have to say it is because our natural instinct is to protect ourselves, defend ourselves, and not die to ourselves. Baptism is the same way. So we die, we're buried, and we're resurrected. That should happen every second of every day.
Right.
You know, that I'm always aware God's got me. I don't have to make my own path. I don't have to make this right. He will make it right. And I'm resting. And the interesting thing is people will respond to this with, well, what about all the do this, do that's in the New Testament?
Yeah.
And my counter would be contextualize those statements. Besides maybe Galatians, every other letter that I can think of, there is a statement, at least one, if not a dozen statements of identity. Here's who you are, here's who you are, here's who you are. And then it will have a transition in the letter. And Ephesians is one of those. You know, so as dearly loved people, be imitators of God.
Right.
But we get the cart before the horse. We say, don't, you know, before you can really be a follower, don't go to sleep when you're angry. Before you can really be pleasing to God, don't do X or don't do Y. And that dynamic, it gets deep into our soul, and we don't recognize it transitions to slave mentality.
Oh, big time, because we're putting our trust and confidence in the wrong place. Exactly. We're putting it on us, on our abilities. And I loved how you talked about how us trying to make things better on our own, trying to be that better or to do something better or to change the world or whatever, and leaning on our own abilities, it just brings out our anger and our restlessness and our lack of peace. All of that betrays us. And that's what Satan's waiting for, is for us to focus on us rather than on God.
That's exactly right.
And trusting what we can do.
Right. That's right. And this is the thing. Back to the garden, like you said, the devil sets up, we're going to do a series in about a month called Lion versus Lion. And it's going to be an ongoing series to really think through that lens of, I'm a victor already. I'm a victor. How do I live into that? How do I think about my relationships, my sin? But one of the cornerstones of this is rules of engagement. And we'll take it to David. I love David and Goliath, but not what I was raised to love. What I love about David and Goliath, it is a case study of how not to do a warfare. Here's what I mean. We have many battles detailed in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Not a single one that we have any details about came down to, you pick your man and we'll pick our man, and they fight and they decide the fate of a nation. How irresponsible is that? And the Israelites allowed the Philistines to set the rules of engagement. All they had to do when Goliath came out, they're saying, you send out your man and we'll fight, and they'll do. All Saul had to say was, archers. David's not the only guy in town that knows how to work a sling. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like, attack. You know what I mean? They accepted the rules of engagement from the enemy. Now, the beauty of God is, God's like, okay, I can work with that too. Mm-hmm. God is not put off by our mistakes. He is not put off by our sin. That's why he came,
Right.
But Eve allowed the devil to set the rules of engagement. He came in, he's like, hey, I heard you can't eat from any tree, puts her on the defense. Oh no, we can eat from trees, but not this one. He's like, you know why that is? It's because God doesn't trust you. So now she's got to prove herself that she's worthy of this knowledge that God doesn't trust her with. Mm-hmm. When all she really has to do is step back and say, hey, God, is this right? It would have changed the whole course of human history.
Exactly.
3 words. Is this right? Is this right?
God, who put you in this beautiful garden, who has taken care of you this whole time.
Exactly.
You wouldn't go to him first.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And again, we're right back at proving identity.
That's right.
Satan is saying, you're not really who you think you are.
Yes.
Prove it.
Yep. It's 100%. I mean, absolutely 100%. And this is the thing that I in my upbringing, I was taught about spiritual warfare, but with that same mentality. You put on the breastplate of righteousness. You be righteous. You take up the sword and you be ready to stab people with it. You be ready to win every argument, you know?
Right.
Even like what is it, the feet fitted with the readiness of the gospel. You better be out there knocking on everybody's door.
Right.
There was something. What's the peace? What's peace? There's like a belt of truth, but whatever peace is, even that was like, you better keep the peace.
Yeah.
And this thing, who is the one that's going to hold the peace? I can't hold the peace for myself. I don't know enough to get through the next minute on my own. If you're saying I'm supposed to take
millisecond.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I could screw this conversation up so royally in one sentence. I don't know what it would be, but that's my potential.
Exactly.
And so it's ridiculous when you bring it into the light.
Mm-hmm.
But so would it have been for Eve. If Eve just would have said, "Is this right?" It would have seemed so ridiculous what the devil was saying a minute later. 10 seconds later, she would have seen God and been like, "That's not right."
And that's the rub. We don't even go to him and say, is this really truth? Is this right? Am I looking at this through the right lens? Is this real? We don't even do that. We don't go to him and ask him, our creator, and we don't even go to him. And
that's right.
And yet back to the wiffle bat, he meets us right where we're at.
Right. That's it.
Right where we are, even in the middle of all that hot mess. He meets us there.
That's right. So, it's so true. I will pray a prayer, and when I'm stressed especially, I will try to say, God, I am too stupid to figure this out. I am too cowardly to see things through. I don't have any perseverance on my own. I mean, I would just own it all. I am telling him nothing. I am reminding myself he's okay with where I'm at.
Right. Oh, yeah.
While we were still sinners, he met me. While I was still an enemy. Now I'm not an enemy. How much more is he for me?
Right. Exactly. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, I can't do this. Mm-hmm. I can't do this on my own. You're going to have to take over because I can't do it. Yeah. Nothing's going to happen with me. So that's right. So I'm laying it in your lap because I can't do it. Yeah. And I think that I loved the whole conversation or the whole point that you made about this idea of rest and resting in him. And I especially liked where you talked about resting from work is when the real work begins in us. Mm-hmm. And I loved that idea and I loved the whole 60 days of rest, all of that. Just if we truly just sat in rest and just focused on him and his sovereignty, what would that mean? That's right. What would that open up for us?
Yeah. Yeah. And COVID has exposed me. I mean, honestly, it's exposed my weakness. Because I take my strength. I have a very negotiable schedule. And on any given Sunday before COVID, I would come into the church building. I'm going to be there about 3 hours. And I'm going to have tasks, but beyond those tasks, I'm immediately thinking, who do I need to connect with? And I'm just watching the people's eyes. And subconsciously, I'm just saying, who needs me this week? Who needs me this week? And I will leave every Sunday with 2 to 3 people I need to meet with or specifics I need to attend to. Okay. That filled my week largely. Planning for things, meeting with people, the post evaluation, emails that say, here's what we talked about, those kind of things. And man, that was taken away with COVID, but it exposed, I was not intentionally spending time. And I have in other phases of life where I'll say 30 minutes a day, I'm just sitting and resting and allowing God to say what he wants. Sometimes I'll have some study. Sometimes I'll pray. But a lot of times it's sitting there and just repeatedly saying, God, give me whatever it is you need me to have. Lord, and I'm so much healthier there. But this has felt like, oh no, that's been taken away from me, the Sunday morning and the face-to-face meetings for a while. And so I feel impotent. I feel helpless, and then I start to tell myself it's not going to get better. people aren't going to come back to church after COVID. And then we're in this building product, and the fear just kind of comes in. And I've had to, especially in the last month, but it was evidence in that lesson. It hit me. What is it I need to hear in that Voices series? And it reminded me that 52 Saturdays a year, these people that were walking with God had to have a time of focus on God, a worship time that was very focused on his sovereignty, and then go rest in that. They weren't even allowed to cook, and just to rest. And I think the first day I'd be like, you know what I mean? It's like we've done prayer experiences where you go and we're going to pray for 3 hours. And when I've said that to people, their jaws have dropped. And these are people that have been connected to God for their whole life, fundamentally. And they'll be like, and the vast majority are like, man, once I relaxed, it was a really beautiful thing, And so it'd take me maybe 4 weeks to start looking forward to it. But then I'd start to depend on it,
Exactly.
And that's not even counting the festivals, the Feast of Tabernacles. They would be there for, I think it's a week in a tent outside their house, which me, and so I'm already sweating from the proposition. But
Me
that,
too.
yeah, but that dynamic though, it's like, how much different would my life be if I just borrowed 5% of that practice, But I think my effort is what accomplishes things.
Exactly.
It's my trust that accomplishes things.
Exactly. It's about being obedient to God by trusting him fully.
Right.
I mean, there is an obedience factor there.
Oh, yeah.
That we miss. I mean, to be able to trust him fully requires some obedience on our part.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's all order. It's cart and horse.
It is.
What's the horse and what's the cart? And I think the challenge we have is a lot of times when I ask a person, do you trust God? And what they think I'm asking is, do you understand God? Meaning, well, I don't know how he's going to get me a job because I've looked for a job for a long time and I don't have a job. And I'm like, that's not even commenting on trust.
No, it's
Trusting
not.
is not about understanding or knowing how this goes. Trusting is believing in him to love you, that he'll take care of you, that he's got this, whatever this is. And I think that's part of the dynamic is people will say, well, no, I obey God whether I trust him or not. And what they're saying is, I obey God whether I understand him or not, or whether I feel motivated or not, or whatever that is. And I'm saying that you're using the wrong words.
And I think it's interesting that you say, I obey God whether I trust him or not, but they're really not, because obedience would require you to trust God.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, this is not, when we say you must trust God, that is not a commentary on obedience. That's what supercharges obedience.
Exactly.
But obedience without trust, so I'm obedient. Let's just play that out. 1 Corinthians 13, if you're obedient to give what you have to the poor and even give your body to the flames, which was a reality for their generation, then and you don't have love, then you accomplish nothing. Well, what is the most loving thing to God? To trust him.
Exactly.
Because without it, you're saying you can't have two masters. He's very clear. I either trust God or I'm trusting somebody else. Exactly. And God's not like, I'm going to wrest that power back. He's like, okay, that's your free will. It's not like we came up with free will and bartered a deal with God. We're like, all right, God, let's see. You know what I mean? What if he gives us a little choice in the deal? He created us with free will because you cannot have agape love. You cannot have real love without free will.
Right.
You have to have the power to choose to have love. So that's the dynamic. So we as humans have created this fight between obedience and trust. In the beginning of Romans, I think it's verse 5, he says, Paul was calling them to an obedience that comes from faith. And see, This is his point in Galatians. He's like, you are being obedient to the old law, but that is not saving.
No.
He's condemning the very thing we're talking about. And he's using very harsh terms. I'm trying to use very nice terms with myself. But he's like, man, and later in that verse, that book, he talks about, man, if they're so worried about circumcision, I mean, think about this, and sorry in the presence of a lady, but it is the word of God. They should go and emasculate themselves. Can you imagine me preaching that? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Hey, fellas, you're so concerned about all this obedience, go emasculate yourself. I mean, that is so offensive. Paul
Right.
is so, he's like, this is so poisonous to us. You must understand how this spirit of slavery is just killing us if we don't
Yes.
own it and turn it over to God.
Exactly. And not even just on just the normal things of day-to-day life. I would even suggest in the use of our gifts. You
Right?
spoke about how on Sunday you relied on that connection eye-wise, and that resonates with me because I'm an encourager. And so, but I have found from the COVID experience that God's revealed yet another layer that I've tried to control, in that I read people. I can walk into a room and I know how everyone's feeling. I feel it. And I have relied on that to use my gift of encouragement. And I feel like I've been stripped of that. Like I can't tap into that. And so I feel frozen. Like I can't continue using my gift. And God has been like, no, you don't understand. I'll send you to the right person. I will put the person in your mind to reach out to if you'll just listen and
Yeah.
trust me. And I will use your gift. COVID's not going to stop your gift. And I feel like we try to keep control of everything, our gifts, just normal life. I mean, everything. It shows up everywhere that we're not trusting him and not being obedient. If you go, you talked about Hebrews 4, but if you go over into Hebrews 5, it says that Christ learned, what was it? Christ learned
Obedience.
obedience from what he suffered. Ouch.
Yep.
And we just, back to that slavery versus freedom mentality, we just want no more pain.
Right.
But this is where we learn.
Yep.
This is where we learn to be obedient, is
Yep.
in the suffering. And it's like, oh, big light bulb.
It absolutely is. It is. And I'll tell you, we have to keep coming back to to this awareness. The more I learn about God, the shakier my footing will feel if I'm dependent on me.
Mm.
And that's why I think people will start off in their walk with God and feel really excited, and then talk to him 30 years later and they're just really worn down. There are exceptions, and I found a lot of exceptions at Memorial, and that's one of the things that drew me to Memorial. But our tendency is, well, we will be exposed of who we're trusting as we learn. And that's that dynamic. And I always like to point this out. That word learned obedience is actually the same word as discipled. Jesus was discipled into obedience by what he learned. And then he says, do you want to be my disciple?
Take
Like,
up your cross.
No. I'm going to think about that figuratively and call my cross that I can't eat. I can't drink milk. That's my cross to bear. You know? And it's like, now keep in mind, I don't like not being able to drink milk, but that's not what he's talking about here.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. It's I just this whole idea of obedience, and I mean that takes me to what you were talking about, submitting to him. If we want to see racial equality,
right.
submit to him first. If we want to see things change in the world, if we want to see more love, submit to him first. And that's what I mean, it's all so intertwined, all from the start of the slavery and freedom mentality all the way to this. It's about submission, and submission is not a weak term.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think people hear submit and they think, well, that makes me weak. Well, yeah, we are weak to begin
True.
with.
Yeah.
So, but submit, I mean, that actually takes some courage. That
Right.
takes a will to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that is not, I mean, just using terms of, I mean, I think of David, who was a warrior and he submitted to God.
Right.
I
Now,
mean,
this is the key. Oftentimes we'll stop in our thinking on like, okay, so Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another. And
Mm.
we stop there. That's not the verse.
No, it's not.
I am not submitting to you, and you are not submitting to me. We are submitting to God in the presence of each other.
Right.
So in a physical manifestation, so bowing is the physical manifestation of submission. So you get caught in my bow to God, and I get caught in your bow to God.
Mm.
Okay, because we think, well, I submit to my wife, my husband, which I would, if you've never studied the Bible, understand that Ephesians 5 22 and following is based on Ephesians 5:21. So that's
Mm.
another subject. But you think, well, I've got to submit to another human being, meaning they're in charge of me. That's not true.
Right.
There is one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. 1 Timothy 2 says, you know, so we are in mutual submission to God, which affects each other, which means I
Right.
don't have to feel the compulsion to power up and correct you. You know what I mean? Now I may notice something wrong in your life, remove my planks, recognize my sin, humble myself to God, and then God may use me to help you remove the speck, right?
Mm.
But it's not my job to go correct everybody. And I would just put it in the hands of Jesus. If it was Jesus' job, if a good Christian corrects everybody, he's terrible at his job.
Right.
He allowed all of his apostles, from what we can see, to be racist from start to finish in their physical relationship. He never calls them out on their racism. He was
Never.
terrible at that job. He was
Mhm.
like, no, it's bigger. First, I have to teach these men to trust God. And then we add in gradually, how do you pray? You know, then we add in gradually, how do you not be arrogant when you have giftedness? You know, these kind of things. And so I could go
Exactly.
on and on about that, but you're absolutely right. Submission is saying to God, I'm trusting you with my power. Use it
Exactly.
how you see fit. And sometimes, like Jesus, it will mean I am bold and I will say things that are confronting. And sometimes, just like Jesus, I will be quiet and I will
Mhm.
say nothing. But the key
Exactly.
is, I don't know that. God knows it.
Right. Right.
Okay, so we're pushing on our time.
Okay.
So I know you're well prepared, so I don't want to miss. Is there any big question before you go, or big observation?
Um, I I don't think so. I mean, I loved how you ended it with John 10, just about you asked the questions, are you feeling robbed? Are you, and talking about thief work and how that is not from God.
Right.
Um, just that whole idea of um, that Satan is the one who can trip us up. He's the one who's the thief. He's the one who steals our peace, who steals life, who steals, and we need to be really careful not to be, oh God, if only you would do this.
That's right. You're exactly right. And that idea in John 10, and I've read it a bunch, but it didn't hit me until this focus of voices, that in the middle of the picture, because I've always focused on, okay, he's the shepherd. Who are these hired hands? Who are, who do we need to be aware of? This kind of thing. And those are valid things to consider. But in the context of this, not only are you his sheep, but you are his sheep that he calls by name.
Right.
My understanding of shepherding, which is admittedly limited, but is that if you name a sheep, you're in trouble because now you're emotionally connected to that sheep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sheep, you have sheep to shear them and eventually to kill them. So that, and so this idea of calling us by name is not small, because the distance between the shepherd and a sheep, I'm just talking about the physiological and presence, I'm not talking about value, but the distance between a sheep and a shepherd is so much smaller than the distance between me and God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, God is so above us. No matter if I gave 1,000,000 years to study and understanding, I still wouldn't begin to corner or to bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm.
I will never be in a place where I'm not desperate for a savior. There's just no way I'm closing that in any adequate way, because perfection never gets touched by imperfection, no matter how little imperfection there is. And so for God to say, I know you by name, that speaks, I mean, if you know anybody that is of celebrity, let's say, that everybody would want their attention and they know your name, especially if it's unmerited, Like you wrote him a fan letter once 10 years ago, and then you see him in a crowd, you put your picture, in the fan letter. I've never done that for the record. But and then you're in a crowd of millions, and they say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Is that you, Gigi?" Or even a name that you don't even know it yet, but it speaks to your heart even more. And that's how he feels about us. That's motivated the entire plan. Can we be lost? Absolutely. We can choose not to participate. Mm-hmm. Sadly, we can be going to church every day and doing as many good things as we can and still be lost because we're not trusting him.
Right.
And I'm not deciding for anybody else. I'm just saying, yes, God has given us the opportunity to not be with him for eternity.
Oh, absolutely.
But his feeling toward us is he wants us. He wants me to be saved much more than I want to be saved even.
Yeah.
Partially because he knows what it's like to be lost, and I don't fully know because I've always been somewhat connected to it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So, yeah, it's really this beautiful story, and the devil wants to cloud it all the time.
And he wants to steal it. He wants to steal the show.
That's right. And he's good at his job. We're just allied with somebody much better.
Yes, we are. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Just grateful. You have tremendous insight. I feel like only because of our self-limitations and for the sake of the audience, do we shut it down now at wherever we're at, 50 minutes or so. But just tremendous insight have had all along. And just very grateful because I do feel, and I know you'd agree, that we could have so many people from Memorial on here. Next week, it's just you and somebody else. You pick your person, and because I just feel like our fabric is, yes, we're a group, but we're a group of people that are individually seeking God who has brought us together. We didn't come together and now we're as a collective seeking God.
Right.
And I think that's a real key difference. And obviously your life, your comments today show lots of evidence of that. And so just grateful for you and Brett for your journey. And just thankful.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed getting to be in the conversation. I seriously, I've been like, oh man, I really want to talk right now to them. So this was fun. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for the sermon Sunday. Like so much there. I mean, just so much gold. I really, really loved thinking about it and just digging more into it. So thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much.
All
Well,
right.
goodbye, everybody. You have a great day.
Have a great day.